So welcome everyone, my name is Claire Mattingly and I'm a celebrant of life, as are all of you for being here today. So thank you for gathering here in the barn this afternoon, not only to say goodbye to Jo, but also to unite in love and friendship, to honour and remember her life. And whilst we cannot expect to step aside from the sadness that is felt today, it's important that we honour Jo's memory by capturing some of those special memories of her and telling her story. It's important that we celebrate her life with all of the wholehearted affection that she truly, truly deserves. So without further ado, Jo's son Chris is going to give a personal eulogy.
So, here to lay our mum to rest after an incredible 101 years of life of achievement. And we notice we're not here in a church, this isn't a religious ceremony, we're not going to be nervously mumbling hymns out of tune, because I don't think Mum ever went to church, that's what I like to remember. But what I'd like to do is take the time to try and tell you about Mum's story as best I can. So, and it's quite a story because, sorry, it's a post in a way. There's a lot of you that only really knew Mum to the latter years of her life. So I'm going to do my best to try and tell you her whole story, really. I only knew Mum for 60 years. She had me when she was 40 years old. So there's 40 years I've got to try and fill in based on by what she told me happened, what my dad told me, what my sister told me, and other family members. So I'm going to probably speed up in places because I'm conscious of the time slot we've got, and I've got 101 years to get through. So we'll start at the beginning. Mum was born 2nd of June 1925 in Battersea in London. And 1925, that's 7 years after the end of the First World War, and only 13 years since the Titanic sunk, just to put it in some sort of perspective. She was the youngest of 3 sisters. Her older sisters were Doris and Wynne. She had a younger brother, Robert, Bob, and so 4 kids growing up in Battersea in the 1920s. And I was trying to picture what it was like in the 1920s. And Battersea back then wasn't the rejuvenated Battersea you see today. Back then it was working class, fairly run down, untouched for decades. Rows of terraced Victorian houses, and the skyline dominated by a Battersea power station, churning out thousands of tonnes of coal a day. Quite a gloomy, smoky, unhealthy place to live, really. We don't know a great deal about Mum's early life because whenever we asked her about it, she said it wasn't a particularly happy time in her life. She didn't get on too well with her mother. She certainly didn't get on very well with her father. He was a drinker and a bit abusive to her mother. So not a happy time for her. But fast forward a bit to her teenage years, and everything changed for Mum then. Her mother and father had split up. Her elder sisters had moved out. Her elder sister Doris got married and moved to Chessington. So she decided her younger brother Bob would go and live with her dad, and that left Mum and Jo in Battersea on their own. Now, Battersea had become a very dangerous place to live by then because the Second World War had broken out and the Germans were bombing London on a nightly basis. And Battersea Power Station would have been a major target for the Germans, so they decided to get out of London and leave. And they headed north, and they went to a small town just west of Manchester called Ratcliffe, in Lancashire. And there her mum ran a cafe, a Greasy Spoon. And next to the cafe was a greengrocer's. And in that greengrocer's worked a dashing, handsome young man called Chris Glover. And Jo and Chris started dating. And it soon blossomed into a full-blown romance. And still not getting on too well with her mum at the time, she moved in with Chris and his family, with his mum, dad, and his brothers and sisters. Now, Mum was viewed with a certain amount of intrigue and curiosity by his family, and because by this stage she was already a very attractive young girl, And she's already showing her talents with her needle and thread. She's making her own clothes, dressing herself in sort of London fashions at the time. And that coupled with her thick London accent, she really stood out like a sore thumb in this small northern town. In fact, I remember her saying his mum used to think she was a little bit tarty because she wore red nail varnish, where she thought. Anyway, the war was in full swing by this stage, and Chris enrolled in Naval Academy to learn Morse code, and when he passed his exams, he joined the Merchant Navy as a radio officer. They got married. She was 17, he was 19, and we've got a photograph of them on their honeymoon standing on the seafront in Morecambe Bay, him dressed in his newly pressed officer's uniform and her in the hairstyles and fashions of the period. They really were the picture postcard wartime young couple. But the honeymoon was cut short. Only 2 days into their honeymoon, and Chris received a telegram with orders to report to the docks at Liverpool and board a ship and was sent off to war. And I can't help think how Mum must have felt. She'd only been married 48 hours and her husband was taken away from her and sent to war. So she returned to his family home, but quickly decided not to stay there. And she headed back down south to Chessington and moved in with her older sister Doris. Now, unfortunately, Doris's husband had been killed at Dunkirk a couple of months before, so she moved in with her as company and waited for Chris to return from sea. Now, during this period, Mum had the one and only job that we know of in her 101 years, where she had to do her bit for the war effort and worked at a tank factory. And she worked as an inspector, and her job was to inspect the various parts of the tank coming through the production line and stamping them with her stamp. And I remember her telling me she didn't really understand what they wanted her to do, so she just used to stamp them anyway. So the family would like to take this moment to apologise to any tank drivers and Second World War who broke down because of Anyway, Dad did return from sea. By all accounts, it was the best part of a year since he had to leave in a hurry on the honeymoon. Returned safe and well, and on leave for a couple of weeks, and had to be sent off again. And this carried on the duration of the war. Remember, the war lasted 6 years. And I can't help think of her joy and relief each time he came back safe and well, and her anxieties and fears each time he had to leave again. Because being in the Merchant Navy was probably the single most dangerous thing you could have done at sea during the war. More merchant ships were sunk by German U-boats than any other form of shipping. In fact, 2 boats he was on were sunk, but he managed to survive both sinkings. Anyway, the war finally ended in 1945, and he was finally discharged from the Merchant Navy in early 46. Later that year, her daughter was born, her first child, my big sister Sandy. And with the anxieties of the war years over, they could finally settle down and start to build a life together. But times were tough. Rationing was still in place. They was initially living with a sister in Chessington. But Dad worked hard. He worked really hard, and they soon got their first apartment. And Mum, as any of you know her would know, was fiercely house proud and remained that way her whole life. So he turned this little apartment into the perfect home. And as I say, Dad worked hard. He worked hard in the day, and at night he would send himself to night school to try and educate himself and get qualifications, because he missed out on a college education or university because the war got in the way. So this was relentless. It went on for years, educating, getting more and more qualified, getting better and better jobs. And they moved from small apartments and masonettes, small house with small garden. Each house perfectly, created by Mum, maintained by Mum, and this is when our love of gardening would have started. And we're kind of into the late 40s and into the 50s now, and if you look at some of these photos of them in the 50s, we're very lucky to have some. They really were a glamorous couple, really glamorous. Mum was a fiercely beautiful woman by this stage. Always immaculately dressed, making clothes for herself, and obviously making clothes for Sandra, something that she carried on for years. She made clothes for me 20 years later. I've got photographs of me, particularly fetching fur coat with matching muff that you put your hands through, and an equally attractive sailor's outfit that she made for me and made me wear as a toddler. which sadly doesn't fit me anymore. But you go back to the 50s, and they really were a very glamorous couple. Sandy was telling me a few weeks ago, she remembers several occasions walking down the road with Mum, immaculately dressed, looking $1 million, to the sound of wolf whistles from the scaffolding above. She really was a head turner. And Dad as well was always immaculately dressed. And I was talking to one of my cousins on Dad's side of the family, and she was saying, we always look forward to Auntie Jo and Uncle Chris coming to visit, because it was like having a couple of movie stars stay. And you can see what she means by these photographs. I mean, he looks like Frank Sinatra and she looks like the Queen. Remember those images of the Queen when she first came to the throne in the early 50s, very attractive woman. Well, you couldn't really tell Mum and the Queen apart. In fact, they were the same age. So this is what I call the glamour years. You know, they really were a very glamorous couple. And things were going well, and Dad was getting better and better at jobs. And in 1960, they bought their first brand new house. It was a bungalow in Claygate, brand new, quite a large bungalow. And Mum immediately set about transforming this empty shell into the perfect home, and then the gardens were set upon. And being a new build, it was just an expanse of mud, but they created a stunning garden. Dad built a large pond with waterfalls, fountains, a Swiss-style log cabin to the side of the pond, which was actually just the garden shed. The lawn was mowed in perfect laser straight lines, the borders tended to within an inch of their life. I think even the fish swam up and down in straight lines. I mean, she created this perfect suburban home. And then 1965, her first granddaughter was born, the lovely Joanne, and then the following month I was born. And Mum was 40 years old by then, and I later found out that a year before she'd given birth to another son, who sadly died at birth. And she was advised at the time, you know, not to go for a second child so late on in life. It was probably quite a dangerous thing to do in the 60s, have a child in your 40s. But I'm glad you did, otherwise I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. And then in 1968, the first grandson was born, Adam. And then by the end of the 60s, Dad found himself in quite a senior management position and company in Tolworth, but decided to take a massive gamble and jack it all in and start his own company from scratch. So 1970, he started what was Durban Engineers, and the offices were in Worcester Park. And then in the early 70s, so I'm speeding up a lot to get through, early 70s, Sandra married David, and they finally had the son-in-law that they'd always wished for their daughter. And David went to work with Dad at the newly formed business, and they worked really hard, and things started to go really well. Until 1974, then a series of 3 tragedies happened, and it kind of hit Mum quite hard, all in the same month, February 74. First of all, I fell off a swing and fractured my skull and ended up in hospital for quite a while. Dad suffered a massive heart attack, and that same month her father died. So 3 things all at once. And doctors advised Dad that, you know, he really should take things easy, not work so hard. He was in his 50s by this stage. And up to then, we'd always holidayed here on the Isle of Wight. We used to stay at the Sandringham Hotel on seafront there. I realised I was back in the 60s and 70s, Sandown was a thriving seaside town. It wasn't the run-down place you see today. So we used to come here for holidays. And Mum said, why don't we move to the Isle of Wight? We love it there. And it's close enough to London. Dad could still go to work for a couple of days a week. But I was thinking, this move to the Isle of Wight, we would have never moved here if it wasn't for David. Because David by this stage was perfectly capable of running a business on a day-to-day basis, and I think without David being able to do that, we would have never moved here. Anyway, Dad agreed and sent Mum off to the island on her own to come and find a house. And she came back and she said, I found a house, and that was Malton Lodge. It's in Juicy Avenue, stone's throw from the beach. But this was unlike any other house they'd ever lived in. It was huge. It was built in the 1800s. It had gardens went all the way around. It had 7 bedrooms, Spanish-style courtyard, swimming pool. So I remember it well. It was Guy Fawkes night, 1974. We moved in there. I was only 8 years old. I remember being really quite scared of this big old spooky house. But Mum immediately rolls her sleeves up and set about transforming this big old place into the perfect home that she always insisted on every home. It had a huge lounge with a grand piano, a huge huge dining room. Dad had a study and library, books stacked floor to ceiling, as was his constant quest for knowledge. A laundry room, a games room, a music room. He had all the toys, you know. The life had completely changed from this bungalow and things were going well, business was going well. Life had completely changed. And by this stage, this is what I call the golden years. We have the glamour years, these are the golden years. Things were really very nice for Mum. And this is around about this time Mum's artistic side really started to flourish. She turned her hand to all sorts of things. She turned her hand to just sewing, creating incredible tapestries and things, but she turned her hand to pottery. And she had a pot's wheel, and Mum could never do anything by halves, and before you knew it, she's churning out pottery, always on a production line basis. She turned her hand to painting, something she'd never done. First watercolours, then oil paintings, and she had a real talent for it. And then her love of dolls started. She would find old porcelain dolls and refurbish them, and with her sort of precedented dressmaking skills would create these incredible dolls. And then she turned out to building and making dolls' houses. Little ones at first, and then huge things, decorated in the most incredible detail. One of the large rooms at the house was turned into her art studio, and I think I counted 13 dolls' houses in there at one point. But they weren't made for commercial purposes to sell, they were simply given away. It was like, oh, do you like that one? You can have it if you like. Very generous, always very generous. And things were going well, and the house, though there's only 3 of us living in this big house, it was never empty. My memories of it was always full of people. I mean, they quickly made friends in the area. They were going to parties or hosting parties at the house. Her brothers and sisters and families would visit. His brothers and sisters came to visit. David and Sandy and family, now with the addition of grandson number 2, Darren, they would always be there. Weekends, school holidays, Easter's, Christmas. And all my friends were always welcome. So it wasn't a quiet place, you know, it was always full of people. And things were going well. David and Dad started a second business, importing cars. I came home from work one day and Dad said, oh, I bought myself a new car, go and have a look at the garage. There's a Rolls Royce sat there. So she was the queen by this stage, you know. And she used to lie on her back in the swimming pool. I used to catch her doing this at night, looking up at the stars. And I'm coming out thinking, there must have been this time when she would lie there thinking back on her life up to this point, starting out gloomy back to see them in the north of England, and then the war years, and starting out living with her sister with nothing, and getting to where she is now. She must have thought, how on earth did we get here? I mean, she enjoyed holidays. She took Sandy and Darren to Barbados. She used to like to stay at this swanky health spa hotel on the mainland, and when she came back one day, she said, I've been at that health spa and I was swimming up and down in the swimming pool talking to that singer you like. And I said, who's that? She goes, you know, that one who's on top of the pops all the time. I said, who? She goes, anyway, there's something not right about him, it's definitely not right. I said, who is it? She goes, Gary Glitter. So she was a good judge of character, even back then. And with my friends as well, you know, I had quite what would be conceived as elderly parents. They had me later on in life. But I learned to play the drums when I was 10 years old, not the quietest instrument you could choose. And by the time I was a little teenager, I had a little school band, and my band would rehearse at the house for hours on end, making the most horrific rap. And remember, these two were the wartime generation. Their preferred music was Glenn Miller or Frank Sinatra, and as these spotty teenagers making the most dreadful rap. But they were always very supportive, especially Mum. And when we started playing little gigs in the village or at the youth club, Mum was always there, very supportive. And later on, when I was about 18, you know, I got into a big band on the Isle of Wight, and Easter Bank holidays, the Isle of Wight used to host the British bike rallies over here. And you get all the bikers and the Hells Angels coming over, and we were playing a concert in Wight Pavilion. And I remember all the bikers were in there, and the Hells Angels and the rock crowd, and I was playing away, and I was looking over my drum kit, looking around the crowd, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke, and I noticed a big group of Hells Angels sitting on the floor to the side of the stage. I sat in the middle of them was my mother in her 60s cheering on the band. She didn't care, so she was always very supportive. Anyway, by the time I was 19, It was suggested maybe I'd like to go and work at the family business under David's wing, so I agreed and packed my little bag, left the island. And that left Mum and Dad in the big house on their own. And they're in their mid-60s by this stage, and they decided the house was too big for the two of them, so in typical Mum fashion, she found this beautiful little thatched cottage on the outskirts of St Helens, the other side of the harbour there. And in her 60s, she's rolled her sleeves up and transformed this was a run-down little place into the perfect home. And then the gardens were set upon with the help of Ian. Now Ian, I can't see him here today, but Ian's been with Mum as Mum's gardener ever since, over 40 years now. They transformed the gardens. And I remember visiting in 1987, it was the night that big hurricane came through. Devastated a lot of the island, the hurricane that took out Shanklin Pier. And they were really worried that the thatched roof was going to come off the house. I woke up next morning and find out that the thatched roof was completely intact, only to find that 3 or 4 trees, large trees, had blown over in the garden. Only to find my mother, in her mid-60s, halfway up a tree, sawing branches off. Because that was the thing with Mum, she was very impatient. If something had to be done, it had to be done now. She couldn't wait for the tree surgeons to turn up. Anyway, the trees were finally cleared, the gardens were restored, and it was a beautiful house. Probably one of the nicest little houses she ever created. 1991, their second granddaughter was born, Amy Jo, named after Mum, who was our daughter, who is hopefully watching this on streaming. She's stuck the other side of the world at the moment, can't get back due to the war. Thanks Donald for that one. And then in 1993, Mum's world changed forever. When sadly Dad suffered his second heart attack, and this time was fatal, and he died instantly at the house. Now this left Mum alone for the first time in 53 years. She'd been with Dad since she was 17 years old. She hadn't worked a day in her life. Since the tank factory hadn't had to pay a bill, didn't know how to pay a bill. Dad had always taken care of all that sort of thing. That's how things were done back in those days. So the next year was a bit of a struggle for Mum, and Sandy got a phone call one day saying, I've got this electricity bill and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And so Sandy said, well, it's easy, Mum, you take it to the post office, hand it in and pay it, which was one way you could pay a bill back in those days. So she'd do that, come home, and inevitably a few days later, the red reminder bill would turn up. Most people would see that and go, oh, I paid that, throw it away. Not Mum. Mum would take the red reminder bill to the post office and pay it again. Through no fault of her own, she just didn't know how to do it. So it was quite a struggle for her, but it didn't last for long because her world was due to change again the following year when, in 1995, she met Ron. She met Ron at Debbie and mine's wedding. Ron was Debbie's grandfather. Also recently widowed, and they were the same age. In fact, Ron was a year younger than Mum, and they sat at the top table at our wedding. And at one point during the day, me and Debbie looked over and they said, well, they seem to be getting on well, that's nice. Only to be announced a month later that they were getting married. So that was a bizarre day. Mum's birthday, 7th of June 1995, I find myself walking my own mother down the aisle and giving her away to my wife's granddad. Anyway, so they got married. Ron moved to the island, and they decided not to live in the house that Mum and Dad had shared, to go and buy their own house. So they moved back to Bembridge and bought a little bungalow in Trelawney Way, a little unassuming, tiny little bungalow that had been built in the 80s. And we said, Mum, why are you buying such a tiny house? And she said, well, we're 70 years old now, we need a house that's future-proof for our old age, easy to maintain, no stairs. So they moved in there. And again, 70 years old, she rolls her sleeves up, turns this unassuming little bungalow into a perfect little house. And then the gardens were set upon. Ron was a very keen gardener as well as Mum, and they transformed what was a tiny front garden, tiny back garden, into a stunning display of colour and roses. And it really was, and still is to this day, spectacular. Also with thanks to Ian, who used to help out. And then the gnomes and the fairies started. One or two at first, and we thought, okay, fair enough. But then, as you know by now, Mum could never do anything by halves, and before you know it, the whole garden is transformed into this spectacular fantasy wonderland with gnomes and fairies and goblins and wizards and waterfalls and water wheels. They hollowed out monkeys. No, that's the back garden. They hollowed out a tree trunk and turned it into a fairy house with windows that lit up at night and thatched roof. And it became a bit of a local attraction. You could see on a daily basis through the lounge window young mothers bringing their little children to wonder at this fantasy garden. It's like a miniature black gang chime. And the back garden, although it couldn't be seen from the road, was equally spectacular. And they would regularly theme the back garden. Remember, jungle theme was prominent for several years. And with waterfalls, palms and ferns, and the whole garden littered with ornamental animals from the animal kingdom. Completely void of taste or scale. A 3-foot gorilla next to an 18-inch giraffe, and we teased Mum, but she didn't matter to her. She was happy as creating these miniature fantasy worlds, like the dolls' houses before. And the dolls' houses carried on. Ron threw himself into all Mum's arts and crafts, and before you knew it, they were making dolls' houses together at a relentless pace. They would exhibit their dolls' houses and charge entry fee, not to make money. All the money was given to a local charity. They just wanted to show people these wonderful things that they created. They created an exact replica of baker shop tea rooms that Ron had worked in as a young boy. From memory, and exquisite these are. And they were members of the Dolls House Club, and they were soon the go-to couple to ask for advice, because the sort of things they were creating were far beyond anyone else's ability. When Ron first moved to the island with Mum, Mum took great pride in showing Ron her beautiful island, and they were like a couple of teenagers in their 70s. You could find them skipping around Black Gang Chine together, and Mum showing Ron all the hidden beaches and coves far off the tourist track. They would go out to lunch and coffee, or often be found at Busy Bee buying more fairies, or attending their gardens. They were relentless. You know, they had the pace of teenagers. We couldn't understand how they were so what's the word? Energized. You know, they were just an incredible couple. Ron was a kind man and absolutely doted on Mum. And I have to say that the 25 years that Mum was married to Ron were probably the happiest of her life. I say that it was a relentless pace. And as the years went on, they got older and older. And as Mum got older, she got frailer. I mean, the mind was still there, but she started to walk on a frame and had to be wheeled around in a wheelchair. And Ron was not only her husband, her companion, her partner, her best friend, but Ron also became more and more Mum's carer. And until 5.5, 6 years ago, Ron sadly passed away. He was 94 years old. And this left Mum on her own for the second time in her life. She'd had 53 years with Dad and 25 years with Ron. But now this time she was afraid, because she was old and quite frail. So it became apparent there's no way she could live in this house on her own. So initial plans were made for her to leave the island and come and live with us. But that didn't last long. Got a phone call, said, I don't want to leave the island. I love my little house, I love my little garden. Your dad's ashes are here on the island. Ron's buried here on the island. What can we do to make it possible for me to stay? And by the way, there is no way I'm going in a beeping home. So we said, okay, that's when we got Mum's first carer. And that was Katie. She looked after Mum for a year, and family would like to take this point in time to thank each and every carer that's looked after Mum over the last 5 years, because if it wasn't for you guys, she'd never have been able to stay in her own house. People like Sally took the lead with carers for a couple of years, right up to lovely Amy and Angie, who looked after Mum right to the bitter end. And Mum went through a lot of carers. Some came and went. Some came and went of their own accord, and moved on to other things, and others ran screaming down the road, because Mum could be difficult at times. That was the thing with Mum. If she liked you, she loved you forever. If she'd do anything for you, she'd give you everything she owned. If she didn't like you out there, God help you. although small in stature, she was a feisty woman. She called a spade a spade. There's no beating around the bush. If you did something wrong, or at least what she perceived you did was wrong, she was going to let you have it in no uncertain terms, using language that would have made the scaffolders blush. And Mum also had this incredible ability to be able to totally misinterpret the situation and get the wrong end of the stick a lot. And we've all been in the family on the end of that venomous phone call where something's happened in the family. And Mum's completely got the wrong end of the stick. And sort of screamed at Jack down the phone. Before you get a chance to say, no Mum, that didn't happen, what actually happened? Bang, the phone goes down. And you could get her into a lot of trouble. But this incredible ability to also be able to completely misread a situation could equally be hysterically funny and have us in floods of tears for sometimes days on end. I mean, I was going to take this point in tell a couple of stories, but I know we're against the time. But I'll tell you one brief story to give you an example of this. So, in her latter years, Mum used to like to watch Sky News, and it used to be on deafening volumes in the lounge. And the headline of the day was the immigrants coming over on small boats. Mum was fixated on this and it was playing on her mind all day until in the end I turned the TV off. I said, look, let's go and get an ice cream. Mum loved an ice cream. So we went to Sandown, got an ice cream. We parked up in that car park at the top of Sandown, looking to the sea. Windows down, sunny day. And on Mum's side of the car, coming down the path, was a young black family with a pushchair and a couple of kids and buckets and spades. And Mum looks at them, looks at me, looks at them, looks at me. I said, what? She goes, that's them, isn't it? I said, there's people off their little boats. I said, no, Mum, that's just a family on holiday. Oh, is it like a carried on eating item too? It could be hysterically funny. Me and Sandy could tell you hundreds of stories. A lot of people probably shouldn't be repeating here, so I'll leave it at that. But then we get to last year. Mum celebrated her 100th birthday, and we had a party in the garden. All the family came, and it went on all day and into the night. We stayed several days celebrating, and she got a card from the King and Queen Camilla, which she displayed with pride. I think she would have much preferred a card from her look-alike, Queen Elizabeth, but she'd managed to outlive her by then. So that was, and then we get to a couple of weeks ago where Mum spent a very brief time, literally 2 days in the hospice, and they phoned us up and said, look, your mum can't stay here because this is a hospice and this is for people who are dying, and your mum's not dying, she's just almost 101 years old. So we kind of thought, well, we're in this for the long run. But then she was only in there for 48 hours and they phoned up and said, sorry, your mum's passed away. And I think, well, how long? Great, you know, there's no long drawn out in this. Almost 101 years old. And she simply said, right, I've had enough of this, I'm going to sleep. And go to sleep. So brilliant. And it's always very sad when someone dies, especially when it's your parent, grandparent. But I'm determined that this not be a sad day of tears. This should be a day of celebration, celebrating this incredibly long life. And by today's standards, almost a peculiar life, really. A life, a sheltered life, a protected life, an innocent life, almost childlike life, completely protected from the real world under the umbrella of the two great men in her life.
Access card.
And the access card. I think this would be a day to give thanks for this life. And I'm going to read out a list of names, and I'll explain why. I'll start right at the very beginning with her first daughter, Sandy, my big sister, followed by Joanne, followed by me, then Adam, and Darren, and Amy Jo, and Oliver, and Riley, Jack, Charlie, and Edith, and Summer, and finally the newest great-granddaughter, little Esme. And you think about this great long list of people, and all these beautiful, hopefully long, colourful lives would never be possible if it wasn't for Jo, because we all stem from her. If she didn't exist, if we took her out of the equation, none of us would exist. So that's the reason to give thanks for this long life. And now, find ourselves here today in an unusual woodland burial ground. And this is a place that Ron and his mum chose as their final resting place some years ago. And Ron is already here waiting for Mum. And we're going to lay Mum to rest next to Ron. And I think how marvellous, not to lay Mum to rest in a church graveyard or a sprawling cemetery, but here with Ron in the woods amongst the fairies. And it's a bit unusual at a funeral, I suppose, but I think if you look at this innocent life, totally protected life, and even after death, these men in her life were protecting her. I mean, Ron worked for the British American Tobacco Company his whole life, and as a result retired on quite a healthy pension. And when he died, a little portion of that pension went to Mum, allowing her to be able to afford carers to look after her in her own home until she was 101 years old. So even in death, these men in her life were protecting her till the bitter end. And I'd say, if you get away with it for 101 years, it deserves a round of applause. Let's do this.
So thank you to Chris for taking us down the trip down memory lane and illustrating his mum's story so beautifully. We're now going to head over to the burial ground. So I think some of you will be familiar with where that is. You turn left with the road and it's left. So we're going to go over there, which is where we will bless the space where Jo will be laid to rest. So we're going to end with a final piece of music. As you say, farewell and goodbyes and adieu.
Welcome back, everyone. So Jo has played her part in the miraculous circle of life, and we have gathered here to lay her body to rest next to her beloved Ron in this beautiful burial ground where she will become one with nature and surroundings bursting with life and beauty. A sacred and contemplative spot which we hope will provide comfort whenever you wish to visit. A permanent marker, this special wife, mother, grandmother, friends, a reminder of the life that she lived and the love that you all shared. But please remember that for as long as you live, Jo's spirit will remain a living part part of you all, because her memory lives on with you, and the bonds of love and friendship between you, that will never die.